Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today we will be discussing the compound tenses in Spanish. My name is Dan and my colleague Zach is here to answer any questions you may have throughout or at the end of the webinar. So if you think of anything, if you need any help, please send those questions in at any time. On this slide here, you can see ways to contact us as you're working through your Spanish course. Right, we're always happy to help you, so please don't hesitate if you do need some assistance. As for today, you can ask your questions in the questions box seen on this slide. In today's webinar, we will cover the 2 progressive tenses and the 4 perfect tenses. We will discuss their uses, translations, different types of verb groups, and show some examples and practice sentences with each of these tenses. So to review, there are 6 total compound tenses which will be explained in this webinar. The 2 progressives, present and imperfect, and 4 perfect tenses, present perfect, past perfect, future perfect, and conditional perfect. We'll get into each of them as we go along. So we're going to begin with the present progressive tense. It is used to describe actions that are going on right now or at this very moment. And there are 2 steps to form a regular conjugation, as you can see on this slide. So anytime you're dealing with something that's happening right now, as you see those examples on the bottom of the slide, if you're saying in Spanish that someone is doing something, people are doing something, the first step would always be to conjugate the verb estar, which means to be. It's one of the 2, but ser is never used in this context. And you conjugate estar to its present tense form. We'll show you that here in a minute. Second step is that estar must be followed by the present participle. And the present participle is formed by removing the infinitive ending, the AR, the ER, or the IR from that second verb, and adding the new or the appropriate ending, which we will discuss shortly. So if you're looking at those examples, comparing the English examples to Spanish, the am and the are would be equivalent to the form of estar, step 1. And the verb that ends in ing, studying and eating, those are the present participles. And here is a Spanish explanation of the present progressive tense. So the present tense form of estar is shown at the top of this slide. Top level is always first person, middle is second, bottom is third, left side is singular, right side is plural. So estoy, estás, está, estamos, and están would be your present tense conjugation of estar, representing step 1 from the previous slide. Depending on who is doing the action, you would pick one of those 5 options and follow it with the present participle of the second verb. And again, the present participle in English ends in ing. In Spanish, if it's an AR verb, the equivalent to ing would be ANDO, as you see on the left side in the middle. And the equivalent for ER verbs to ing would be IENDO. So you have some examples of sacar and comer in the present progressive tense at the bottom of the screen here. To say that I am taking, if you're taking, a test, or if you're taking a picture, taking out the trash, right, you would say estoy sacando, it's happening right now. And you would go on. Estás sacando, estamos sacando, and están. You are, he or she is, we are, and they are taking. And the same would go for comer. It's another regular verb, just like sacar, but sacar is an AR verb, that's why the ando is present. However, comer is ER, so the IENDO ending must be represented here. So if somebody was, let's say, to call you and they asked you what you're currently doing and you wanted to say that I'm eating, I'll call you back shortly, you would say estoy comiendo. Estoy representing the am portion of that, comiendo the ing, eating. So these are two examples of regular verbs in the present progressive following the two steps. Notice how the gerund is the same spelling in every person. That does not change. Only the form of a star changes depending on the subject. Okay, so everything we talked about so far is regular in the present progressive, but as always with all tenses, there are always irregular portions. And in this case, the irregular portion of the present progressive would be the participle. And here you have a list of some common irregular present participles. Left side is the infinitive verb, middle is its irregular participle, on the right, the meaning of the participle. So if you notice, there are a couple trends here. Okay, if you look at the first few, you notice there's a Y present in the irregular participle. Basically, that Y has replaced the I, which would normally be there for regular present participles. Okay, so for the first 5 on this slide. For the next 3, from pedir down to venir, you notice that it's an E to I, sort of a stem change. Nothing actually happens to the gerund or the present participle ending. The IE and the O is the same, but the E from the stem, pedir, decir, venir, that first E, the only E there, changes to an I for those, making them irregular. And for the last 2, the third type of common irregular present participle is an O to U change. If you notice, dormir has an O, but its present participle has a U. Morir has an O, and again, likewise, its present participle has a U. So the same steps would apply if you're using any of these verbs to be conjugated, just the fact that the second part, the present participle, would be irregular, not following the regular rules. Okay, we're going to talk about some practice sentences with regular and irregular verbs in the present progressive. Then we'll take a moment to give you a chance to answer any questions you might have before we move on. Okay, on this slide, you see some practice sentences and a question at the bottom. And for the first one, the verb escribir is being used in the present progressive to say that I am writing a document today. Since the subject is I, which would be yo in Spanish, estoy agrees with that. Escribir is regular. Drop the IR from the infinitive and add IENDO. Second example shows the irregular venir. It's one of those E to I irregular present participles. The verb venir means to come. So to say that we are coming to your house, we would use estamos viniendo a su casa ahora. And since we are the subjects, estamos agrees with that. Viniendo, again, the E after the V changes to an I, being irregular, not following the regular rules similar to escribir. And finally, another irregular present participle, the verb traer. The infinitive is spelled T-R-A-E-R. You saw it on the previous slide on the list of common irregular present participles. If you were to ask a group of people, are you bringing the meal to them or the food to them? Están, third plural for you all. Trayendo is one of those where the Y replaces the I, making it an irregular present participle. Okay, if you have any questions for Zach at this time, please send those in right now, and I'll give you a moment to do so. If not, we'll move on shortly. As we transition, we're going to move on to the second progressive tense, known as the imperfect progressive. As you can see here, it's one that describes actions that were ongoing in the past, having started at a specified time. So we're no longer talking about something that's going on right now, but something that was happening at some point in the past. And again, the conjugation rules are basically the same as the present progressive. The big difference there being at the end of step 1, we're no longer using the present form of estar. Now we will use the imperfect form of estar, which is a past tense form, which you may be familiar with. If not, we'll discuss it shortly. And the second step is the same. We're still going to form the present participle of the second verb. And again, it can be regular, ending in ando or iendo, or it can be one of those irregular from a few slides back. Okay, and if you notice the difference in comparing the example sentences, for present progressive, it was something like I am studying, but here I was studying. Present progressive would have been they are dining. Imperfect progressive, they were dining at some point in the past, not ongoing right now. So, similar to present progressive, like I said, the previous two rules still apply. The difference being here now the conjugation of estar is in the imperfect tense, the estaba, estabas, and so on and so forth. Estaba meaning I was, estabas you were, okay, so on and so forth. Second step is still the same. Form the past participle, whether it's regular, as shown here, or irregular. And we do have two examples of regular verbs again down below. Still using sacar and comer to say I was taking or I was eating. Estaba sacando or estaba comiendo. And again, the present participle stays the same. There's no change in the spelling throughout the entire conjugation. And to wrap up imperfect progressive, here are a few examples. First plural being expressed in number 1. We were cooking when Carlos arrived. Typically, imperfect progressive and any imperfect tense deals with something that was ongoing while another action happened. Not always, but pretty commonly seen. Second one is asking, were you paying attention? First two examples here are regular present participles, cocinando and prestando. But the last one, the verb to correct, corregir, which was on our list of common irregular present participles, it's one of those E to I changes. So it's actually the second vowel in this stem for the verb corregir, a little bit unusual. Not many verbs have two vowels in the stem. If that happened to be regular, there would be an E after the R's, but here it changes to an I since it is irregular. So they were correcting the exams or the tests. First two, regular, bottom, number 3, irregular. So a lot of similarities between the two progressive tenses, biggest difference being the form of estar. Again, I'll give you a second in case you have any questions you want to ask of Zach, and if not, we're going to move on and transition to our perfect tenses here soon. Okay, so transitioning to a perfect tense, we have a brief introduction here. All perfect tenses require the use of a respective conjugation of the helping verb haber. All right, no longer will we be using estar, that's for progressive tenses only. And haber now will be followed by a past participle, not to be confused with what we just discussed, which was a present participle. Typically, past participles end in ed. Okay, but in Spanish, they're formed by removing the infinitive ending and adding ado, not ando, or ido, not iendo, like we saw with present participles. Okay, and the past participle does not change within perfect tense conjugations, right? Meaning its ending within this context will always be the letter O. That's not always going to be the case with past participles, as we will see if you attend or when you learn about the passive voice in future webinars or throughout your course study. So we're going to dive into compound tenses or perfect tenses here a little bit. All right, just to begin, we'll start with the irregular past participles, those that do not end in ADO or IDO. It's a pretty abbreviated list here. Okay, these verbs are the ones that you have to be mindful of to choose the appropriate irregular form. Notice how Most of them don't end in ADO or IDO. If they do end in IDO, there's an accent on these, and that makes it, even though it's subtle, that makes it an irregular past participle. Okay, so you have a short list here, but definitely a good list to be mindful of when trying to conjugate to perfect tenses, which is what we're going to focus on here very soon. Okay, so this list and the list of irregular present participles, definitely two valuable resources to be mindful of as you continue your studies with these topics. Okay, so the first of the four perfect tenses is known as the present perfect tense. And as you can see at the bottom, there's some English examples there. The word has or have must be present in a present perfect translation from Spanish to English. So the present perfect is the tense that is used to express an action that either has or actions that have, quote unquote, happened. So as you see at the bottom, I have walked to school every day this week. She has eaten her lunch already. When you hear that combination of either has or have followed by a past participle that ends in ed more often than not, or en like eaten, you have what's known as the present perfect. Okay, and the present perfect tense uses the present form of haber, which you see in the chart in the middle of this slide to the left side. As, hemos, and an. I have. As, you have. He or she has. Hemos, we have. An, they have. And then you follow that with the past participle like andado or comido. That combination translates as I have walked, you have walked, etc. I have eaten on the right side, you have eaten, etc. So present perfect, something that has or things that have been done. And the thing that will change about each of the perfect tenses is the conjugation of haber, which is at the top left of this slide. Each of these has a respective conjugation, as mentioned on the intro slide to perfect tenses. Okay, but first, before we show you that, here are a few examples of present perfect. Have you gone to the store? Has ido. They have studied. First two being regular past participles, ido and estudiado. But again, the third one showing an irregular past participle, visto, comes from the verb ver, V-E-R, which means to see or to watch television, movies, etc. So ver will never be written or pronounced as vido. It's not a Spanish word as far as a past participle is concerned. Visto is the irregular form from a couple slides back from our list of common irregular past participles. So Javier has not seen or watched the movie. No ha visto, not película. Okay, so that's our discussion on present perfect. We're going to transition here to the past perfect tense. And everything should look very similar or comparable to a couple slides back when we introduced present perfect. The biggest difference now, as I said, is that top left chart. In this case, past perfect is used to describe an action that had been done. No longer has or have, but the word had, as you can see at the bottom of the slide. And it uses the imperfect form of haber, a past form of haber, había, habías, so on and so forth, to say that I had walked, you had eaten, etc. So as the form of haber changes, so does the translation. In this case, again, había through habían is the imperfect tense form of haber and is the only tense used with a past perfect conjugation. The rules on past participles do not change. The past participles, if they are regular, still end in ADO or IDO, and if they are irregular, will still come from that list of common irregular past participles we began this topic with. Okay, so here are some examples. Notice the translation in English all include the word had, not has or have, which would be present perfect. So to say she had not eaten paella until tonight, no había comido. Comido is regular. Second one is irregular. We saw this in the present perfect as well. I had seen that movie before all of you. Había visto. Visto again being your irregular past participle here. And back to a regular past participle. They hadn't gone to the store. No habían ido a la tienda. So first and third are regular past participles. Second one is an irregular. And if you notice, we do have some negative examples here. If it's something that had not been done, to form or to make any verb negative in Spanish, to say someone has or had not done something, did not do something, simply put the word no before the conjugation. In this case, nothing will ever come between the form of haber or comer in any perfect tense. Nothing will break up those two parts. They're inseparable. The no can only go before them. Okay, so that wraps up our discussion on past perfect. We're now going to transition into the third of four perfect tenses, the future perfect tense, which is the tense that describes an action that will have happened by a potential or possible time in the future or down the road. As seen in that example, if you, as a student, are thinking about graduating from high school, having a goal in mind, if you were to say something like, I will have or I will have already graduated by the year 2020, that combination of will have is a representation of future perfect. It's the only way that this tense can translate. If you just say, I will graduate soon, without the inclusion of have, now we're no longer talking future perfect. We're strictly talking future tense, the simple tense, not the compound tense. So when that word have follows a form of will, it's always a representation of future perfect. And you're using the future tense of haber followed by a past participle in this context, which we will show you on the next slide. Okay, so again, there's that top left or that middle left chart, starting with abre. Habrás, habrá, habremos, and habrán. Abre meaning I will have. Nothing to do with possession. Okay, but I will have done something, as you can see on the bottom. I will have walked, let's say, 3 miles by the time I got to my friend's house. I will have eaten, 2 hamburgers by the end of this meal. Okay, as long as you have will and have back to back, you have a form of the future perfect tense. And again, if it's a regular past participle, like andado or comido, will always end in adio or idio. And irregulars do exist, as we've seen in the first two perfect tenses, which we'll show you here on the next slide with some more examples. Okay, so the first two here are regular past participles. No habré pasado, I will not have spent much time with her. Second one, conocer, to know or to meet in this context. Right, they will have met for the first time tonight. Habrán conocido, notice the ADO and the IDO endings, both regular. But the verb volver is used in number 3. Volver means to return, when a person comes back from a place. Not to be confused with devolver, which means to return an item. Maybe you bought something at the store and brought it back for some reason. In this case, it's talking about the person, Sylvia, will have returned with the groceries. Maybe she will have returned within, an hour. So vuelto is the irregular past participle. No rhyme or reason to those irregulars, strictly memorization for those 8 or so irregular past participles. Okay, and the last of the perfect tenses is the conditional perfect. The conditional perfect is the tense that describes actions that would have been done or somebody would have done in the past. Okay, so there's your example. I would have gone to the store, but for some reason I chose not to or I wasn't able to. There's always a specific, condition or circumstance that keeps somebody from having, done something. And I would have bought that shirt if I had enough money. You didn't do it, you would have, but it did not occur. So as long as you see the combination of would and have, you know that you have a conditional perfect verb requiring a conditional perfect conjugation. And the way that is formed is by using the conditional tense form of haber, which is shown on the top left chart. Looks a lot like the imperfect, but there's a difference here. This form has an R, where the imperfect había does not have that R. So habría, habrías, habría, habríamos, and habrían. I would have, you would have, he or she would have, etc. Whatever it is they would have done, like walked or eaten again, are two examples, can be filled in this case as regular past participles. And again, irregulars still fit, just like all the other perfect tenses. But for this, the sake of this slide, habría andado, I would have walked, but my friend gave me a ride. Or I took the bus, something like that. I would have eaten, but I didn't have enough time. I had to get to work. Okay, those conditions of having a ride or not having enough time are the reasons why we choose conditional perfect tense. Very specific circumstances or conditions. And here we see a few example sentences. You would have written a novel. I don't know if you had the chance or if it was required. In this case, escrito is an irregular past participle. It does not end in adio or idio. Tu habrías escrito comes from that list we started this topic with, about 8 or so irregulars. And the second and third are both regular past participles. Lavado, coming from the verb lavar, to wash. Maria and Felipe would not have washed the dishes, maybe if they weren't asked to. And finally, ido, from ir, to go. Carlos and I would have gone to the concert, maybe if the weather was better, or if we had enough money for the tickets. The weather and the money being the conditions that kept us from going, or maybe not knowing about it. Okay, so those are a few examples. And if you notice, one thing at the bottom, this will come up throughout your course, the word al in example number 3. Al is a contraction. Right? Not many contractions exist in Spanish, al and del being the only two. They don't exist like they do in English, like can't and won't. Those types of contractions do not exist in Spanish. But that word al is a combination of two words, a, the preposition meaning to or at, combined with the definite article, the masculine singular definite article, the word el, el, not the word that means he. There's no accent on this form. When you have those two words back to back in Spanish, like a el concierto, literally to the concert, you contract a and el, remove the e, make it one word, forming the word al. So something to keep in mind. You will definitely see that and its counterpart, the word del, meaning from the or of the, in your course. So a good note to be mindful here on this slide. Finally, a topic that we will not get into in detail today. It is something that will be discussed on future webinars coming up soon in May. If you would like to learn more about subjunctive, we encourage you to sign up for those. Subjunctive perfect is another compound or another perfect tense. All right, like I said, it'll be discussed in upcoming webinars, but just to introduce it briefly here, it is the tense that is used to describe actions that may or might have happened in the past. I might have seen that movie. I just don't really remember. Okay, so something that we're not going to ask you to be familiar with as far as conjugations are just yet, but we will discuss in future webinars coming in May. So we should all have information about that. If you'd like to join us for those, we're going to break the subjunctive tense into 2 parts. Okay, that concludes today's webinar. We thank you very much for your attention. We hope that you learned a little bit about compound tenses. If you have any questions for Zach at this time, you may send them now. And we wish you the best of luck in your course. Buena suerte. If you do have questions, again, here are the ways you can reach us on this slide. All right, have a great day. Thanks for your attention.